On a freezing winter night, a 27-year-old woman was biking through the empty streets of Maple Brook, making deliveries, just hoping to earn enough for one more night at her shabby boarding house. As she hurried to finish her last order, she saw an old man standing by the bus stop, lost and shivering in the bitter cold. She hesitated. This delivery was her last chance to keep her job, but compassion won. She turned back to help him. What she didn't know was that the old man was the father of the most powerful Mafia boss in the city, and that one small act of kindness would pull her into a dangerous world she never imagined and rewrite her destiny. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me where you're listening from in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that warm your heart, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's episode. Evelyn wrapped her fragile, thin scarf around the old man's neck, carefully tucking each corner down inside his coat to trap what little warmth it could hold. Her hands were trembling from the cold, but she didn't care. He needed it more than she did. She glanced at her worn-out bicycle, the rear rack that was meant for hauling goods, and that now would have to carry a human being. She pulled the bike closer and checked whether it was steady enough. Evelyn turned to the old man and spoke gently. "Hold on tight, sir. I'll take you home." Edward looked at her with cloudy eyes, dim with age yet filled with surprise. "You don't need to do this," he said, his voice shaking from the cold. Evelyn smiled, small but resolute. "It's too late now, sir. Trouble is my everyday business." For the first time since she'd met him at the bus stop, Edward smiled. It was a weary, fragile smile, yet strangely warm. For a moment it lit up his aged face, as if a single shaft of sunlight had pierced a bitter winter night. Evelyn helped him sit on the rack, making sure he was holding firmly to her shoulders before she started to pedal. The wheels ground against the frozen road as she pushed forward. Wind off the river struck her face like invisible knives, slicing at her skin, stinging her eyes until they burned. Evelyn lowered her head, set her jaw, and kept pedaling. The road was slick and dangerous. More than once, the wheels nearly slipped out of control on patches of ice hidden beneath a thin layer of snow. She had to pour all her strength into keeping her balance, pedaling while fighting to make sure the old man wouldn't fall. His weight wasn't heavy, but it was enough to make the old bicycle groan with every turn of the wheels. Her phone in her pocket vibrated. Then it vibrated again. Then once more. Evelyn knew who it was without looking. Her manager. Threatening messages. Final warnings. She'd heard more than enough. She chose not to answer and kept pedaling in silence. After a long while, Edward's voice came from behind her, weak but clear. "It's colder than it used to be." Evelyn nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes. And the world is crueler, too." Edward was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice trembling, yet carrying a strange kind of peace. Not all of it. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't know what to say, but his words kept echoing in her mind, like a gentle reminder in the middle of a ruthless winter night. Then he began to sing. Not a complete song, only an old tune without words, soft sounds slipping from his trembling lips. The melody was sad but beautiful, like a memory faded by time yet still lingering somewhere in the mind. Evelyn didn't ask what it was. She only listened, letting that tune blend with the wind and the rasp of wheels over snow. Her phone vibrated again, longer this time, more urgent. Evelyn pulled over to the side of the road, panting, and took the phone out to look. The screen lit up with a short message from her manager. Final warning. She was fired. Evelyn stared at the cold lines on the screen. She'd known this would happen from the moment she decided to turn back to help the old man. She'd known, and she still chose it. No regret. She shut the phone off completely and shoved it deep into her pocket. It was done. She couldn't go back anymore. Evelyn took a deep breath, her exhale turning into a white plume in the freezing air, and then she kept riding. The road began to change as they moved farther into the suburbs. Small, shabby houses gradually gave way to larger, more lavish mansions. Tall iron fences, automatic gates with security cameras, expensive cars parked in the yards. Evelyn had never set foot in this area. This was the world of the wealthy, a place people like her could only look at from far away. Edward suddenly lifted a hand and pointed ahead, his voice hazy as if he were trying to remember something. "Over there. I think it's over there." Evelyn followed the direction of his finger. At the end of the road, a massive estate rose out of the darkness, hidden behind a high iron fence and rows of ancient trees. Light from inside spilled out in a warm golden glow, utterly at odds with the skin-cutting cold outside. She swallowed, her pulse quickening. This place didn't look like any home she'd ever seen. It looked more like a fortress than a house. But she'd come too far to turn back. Evelyn tightened her grip on the handlebars, drew in a deep breath, and kept pedaling into the darkness ahead. Not knowing she was riding into a completely different world, crossing a threshold from which there was no return. The mansion rose before Evelyn's eyes like a fortress in the black of night. The iron gate towered overhead, perhaps nearly 3 meters high, with razor-sharp spikes thrusting up into the dark sky. Security cameras were mounted everywhere, cold electronic eyes sweeping every corner. Brilliant floodlights ringed the stone wall, turning the place into an island of light in the freezing darkness. Evelyn stopped her bicycle, her mouth falling open, unable to speak. She looked at the mansion, then at the old man behind her, then back at the mansion again. "He lives here?" she asked, her voice unable to hide her shock. Edward nodded slowly, his clouded eyes fixed on the house with a vagueness, as if he were trying to remember something. "Home. Yes, my home." Evelyn swallowed hard. Something about this wasn't right. The survival instinct honed by years of living alone on the streets began ringing alarm bells in her head. This was not an ordinary house. No one needed that many cameras just to protect a home. No one needed an iron fence as high as a fortress wall. She looked closer and made out figures moving behind the gate. Not one or two, but many. They paced and patrolled, flashlight beams sweeping back and forth like searching eyes. Evelyn felt a chill run up her spine. And it wasn't from the weather. She wanted to turn the bike around. She wanted to leave. Every cell in her body was screaming that this was danger, that she should run right now. But then she felt the old man behind her, trembling more violently. She turned back, and her heart clenched. Edward's skin had gone a pale bluish color. His lips were purple. He barely had the strength to hold on to her shoulders anymore, his body listing, nearly fainting. Evelyn had no choice. Whatever this house was, whoever the people inside were, she couldn't let an old man freeze to death on the street. She had come too far to quit now. Evelyn steadied the bicycle, stepped up to the gate, and pressed the bell. She waited, feeling the heavy thud of anxiety in her chest. The gate opened almost immediately, so fast it made her flinch, as if they had been waiting, as if they had known someone would come. Everything happened too quickly after that. 4 or 5 men dressed in black rushed out from behind the gate. They moved like shadows, precise and dangerous. A flashlight beam hit Evelyn square in the face, so blinding she had to squeeze her eyes shut. And then she saw the guns in their hands, pointed straight at her. "Who are you? What did you do to him?" A voice roared with a threat that filled the air. Evelyn didn't even have time to answer. Someone seized her arm and yanked her hard off the bicycle. She hit the ground, her knee slamming into freezing concrete. A sharp, searing pain. Behind her, Edward nearly toppled, but another man caught him in time. "I didn't do anything," Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking with panic and cold. "I found him at the bus stop. He was lost. He was freezing out there. I was only trying to help him." No one believed her. Cold eyes watched her as if she were an enemy, a threat that had to be eliminated. Evelyn felt fear rise into her throat. She had made a mistake. She should not have come here. One of the men pulled out his phone, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. He dialed and spoke into it, his voice low and grave. "Boss, we've got a situation here. Someone brought your father back. A woman." Identity unknown. Silence. Tension thick enough to suffocate. Evelyn knelt on the frozen ground, her hands pinned tight behind her back, the gun barrel still aimed at her head. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare breathe too hard. Then she heard footsteps, slow and measured, coming from inside the house, each step like the pulse of power itself. The front door opened. Warm golden light spilled out from within, casting a long dark shape across the ground. A tall man stepped out over the threshold. His face was swallowed by shadow, only his eyes catching a glint of something cold and dangerous. Evelyn looked up, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew he held her life in his hands. The man stepped out of the darkness, and Evelyn felt as if the air around her thickened. He was tall, likely over 1.85 meters, with broad shoulders and storm snow eyes that held a chilling intensity. His face was sharp and cold, his features angular, as if shaped by a perfectionist craftsman, a hard jaw, a straight nose, and a gaze that held the chilling intensity of a blizzard. But what made Evelyn shiver wasn't his appearance. It was the complete emptiness in those eyes. No expression, no feeling, only absolute control, and a silent authority that radiated from every step he took. He looked like a man who had seen too much darkness and had learned to become darkness in order to survive. Evelyn guessed he was about 36, but those eyes were far older, as if he had lived through 1,000 years of suffering. The men in black snapped to attention when he appeared, heads bowed, no one daring to look him in the eye. This was their boss. This was the man who held everyone's life in his hands. Then that cold gaze shifted to the old man being supported by a guard, and in that instant, Evelyn witnessed something she never expected. The ice on the man's face melted. The chill vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by a pure, raw worry, so painful it was hard to watch. "Father," his voice broke. No longer power or threat, only the panic of a son, afraid of losing his father. He ran to him, almost lunging toward the old man, taking him from the guard with a gentleness completely at odds with his terrifying presence. "Are you all right? What happened?" He checked him from head to toe, his strong hands gentle as they lifted the old man's face, searching his clouded eyes. Edward mumbled, his voice weak and broken. "That girl. She helped me. So cold. So cold." The man turned to look at Evelyn. The man's shadowed look swept over her from head to toe, judging, analyzing. Evelyn was still kneeling on the ground, her clothes torn, her face flushed from the cold, her hair in disarray, looking more like a drifter than a threat. But she knew he still didn't believe her. In his eyes, she was still an unknown, a risk not yet defined. "Who are you?" His voice rang out, no longer carrying the worry of the moment before. Back to coldness and control. Evelyn drew a deep breath, forcing her voice steady even as her heart hammered like a war drum. "Evelyn Martinez. I'm a delivery courier. I found your father at the bus stop on Maple Road. He was freezing, confused. The buses had stopped running hours ago." The man frowned, that sharp gaze cutting through her as if reading every thought in her mind. "And you decided to bring him here? A stranger? To this address?" Evelyn answered, her voice calmer than she expected. "He told me where he lived. I wasn't going to let him freeze to death out there." They stared at each other. The silence stretched. Evelyn didn't know what he was searching for in those piercing depths, but she didn't look away. She had nothing to hide. She had done the right thing. If he didn't believe it, that was his problem. Finally, after a moment that felt like a century, the man spoke. "Let her go." The guards released her at once. Evelyn staggered to her feet, her knee still throbbing, her hands trembling as she brushed the dirt from her clothes. "Take my father inside. Call Dr. Morrison. Immediately." The man's order left no room for argument. 2 guards supported the old man and hurried into the house, quick and careful. Then he turned back to Evelyn, his steely gaze still giving away nothing. "And you, come with me. We're not finished." Evelyn wanted to say something, to protest, to tell him she had done her part, and she wanted to go home. But she knew that wasn't a choice. Not now, not here. She followed him in silence into the mansion. The instant she crossed the threshold, Evelyn felt as if she had stepped into another world. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, spilling warm golden light that glittered like stars. Old paintings lined the walls, stern portraits and lavish landscapes she was certain each one cost more than a lifetime of her work could ever buy. The polished marble floor reflected her back at herself, a small, ragged girl, out of place in luxury so suffocating it stole her breath. This world didn't belong to her. Evelyn knew that. She was only a poor delivery courier, a person on the verge of being thrown out of a miserable boarding house. She didn't belong here among high walls and dark secrets. But right now, she had no choice except to keep walking into the darkness ahead, following the mysterious man whose name she didn't even know yet. Evelyn was led into a large room, set deep inside the mansion. It was an office, with a massive oak desk planted at its center, a dark brown leather chair, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves packed with hardbound volumes that looked expensive. Everything in this room breathed power and wealth, from the thick Persian rug underfoot to the oil paintings on the walls. But Evelyn wasn't fooled by the luxury. Her eyes swept the space and caught the odd details an ordinary person might have missed. A large safe sat in the corner, half hidden behind a curtain. Security cameras were fixed in every ceiling corner, electronic eyes quietly recording everything. And on the rug near the door, there was a dark, smudged stain, as if someone had tried to scrub something away but hadn't completely succeeded. Evelyn didn't want to think about what it was. She stood there alone for a few minutes, feeling as though she'd been locked inside a glass cage, watched from every direction. Then the door opened and the man stepped in. He had traded the long coat for a black shirt, but tension still showed in every line of his angular face. He stood opposite Evelyn without sitting, deliberately creating distance and rank. This was his territory, and she was only an intruder waiting to be judged. "My people are checking your background right now," he said, his voice low and cold. "If you lie about anything at all, I'll know within an hour." Evelyn lifted her chin and met his icy, stormy look. "I'm not lying. I've got nothing to hide," she said, calm but unyielding. "I saw an old man who needed help. I helped him. That's all." The man folded his arms across his chest, his gaze narrowing with suspicion. "Nobody does anything without a purpose. What do you want? Money? A reward?" Evelyn felt anger flare in her chest. She'd lost her job. She was about to lose her home. She was standing here, freezing and hungry, treated like a criminal, only because she'd tried to save someone's life. And now he was asking what she wanted. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice trembling with restraint. "I just want to go home." They looked at each other in silence. He didn't speak, but Evelyn could see him thinking, weighing every word she'd said, searching for a crack, searching for a lie. She didn't look away. She had nothing to fear. The door opened again, and another man stepped inside. Younger, around 34, with a fit build and a professional face that revealed nothing. He held a phone in his hand and moved to the gray-eyed man's side. "Boss, the background check is done," the guard reported. Then he read, his voice flat, like he was delivering the news. "Evelyn Martinez, 27, orphaned since age 8. Previously married, husband died in a car accident 2 years ago. No criminal record, no suspicious ties to any organization. Currently a delivery courier for Fast Drop." He looked up at his boss. "She's clean. Just a normal person." Silence. Evelyn felt the gray-eyed man's expression shift. The suspicion was gone. In its place was something else, something she couldn't read. Maybe curiosity, maybe surprise. "You abandoned a delivery to help a stranger," he said slowly, as if trying to understand something just out of reach. "You knew you'd lose your job. Why?" Evelyn looked at him, the question echoing in her mind like an empty hallway. Why? Why did she have to explain something that should have been obvious? "Because he needed help," she answered, her voice gentle but certain. "That's the only reason I need." The silence stretched. The man stared at her as if she'd spoken a language he didn't understand, as if the idea of helping someone with no reward was something foreign to him, something he'd forgotten long ago or had never known at all. The door opened a third time and an older man stepped in. He was around 58, his hair silver, his face kind, wearing a neat suit. Yet he wasn't cold or frightening like the others in this house. "Sir, your father is awake." He asked about the young woman. "He wants to thank her." The gray-eyed man nodded after a brief hesitation. He signaled for Evelyn to follow the butler. Evelyn walked, but she could feel his gaze on her back, heavy as an invisible hand resting on her shoulder. She didn't turn around. She didn't know whose world she had just stepped into. A world of guns, of secrets, of dark power. She didn't know that the man watching her from behind, Gabriel Rivera, the most powerful mafia boss in the city, was feeling something he hadn't felt in many long, cold years. Concern. Real concern for a stranger. Evelyn followed the butler through the mansion's long, wide corridors until they stopped in front of a dark wooden door. He knocked softly, then opened it and motioned for her to go in. The bedroom was far warmer than the rest of the house, likely because a fireplace was burning in the corner, the flames dancing and throwing shimmering shadows across the walls. Family photographs were everywhere. In most of them, the image of a beautiful woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile appeared, beside a boy with familiar gray eyes. Edward lay in bed beneath thick blankets, his color far healthier than when Evelyn had found him at the bus stop. When he saw her, his cloudy eyes brightened. He lifted a hand, and she stepped closer, letting him take her freezing fingers in his. "Thank you, my child," he said, his voice weak but sincere. "You saved an old man tonight." Evelyn shook her head slightly. "I only did what anyone would do." Edward smiled, but that smile carried a deep sadness. Not everyone would. You'd be surprised how many people would walk past without even looking back. Evelyn fell silent. She thought of the people who had passed the bus stop tonight, heads down, ignoring the old man trembling in the cutting wind. He was right. Not everyone would stop. "I have to go," she said gently. "It's very late." Edward nodded, and squeezed her hand one last time. "Be careful, my girl. This world needs more people like you." Evelyn bowed her head to him and left the room, her heart a little warmer, though she didn't understand why. When she returned to the main hall, Gabriel was standing there, as if he'd been waiting. "You need my car to take you home," he said, not a question. Evelyn shook her head. "I've got my bicycle." Gabriel looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Your bicycle is broken." The chain snapped. "My driver will take you home." Not an offer. An order. Evelyn was too exhausted to argue. She nodded and followed a guard outside, climbing into the glossy black car waiting at the curb. The car moved in silence through the night streets. Evelyn stared out the window, watching lavish houses slowly give way to the familiar rows of worn, aging buildings. From heaven back to hell. When the car stopped in front of the shabby boarding house where she lived, Evelyn knew at once something was wrong. The landlady stood outside the door, arms crossed, beside a pile of garbage bags. Not garbage, her belongings. Evelyn stepped out of the car, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Chen," she began. "You're 3 days late on rent," the landlady cut in, her voice ice cold. "I warned you. Get out." Evelyn felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "Please, Mrs. Chen, just one more day. I'll have the money." "No more chances," the landlady said firmly. "Get out, tonight." Then she turned and walked back inside, slamming the door, leaving Evelyn standing there with her things at her feet. With trembling hands, Evelyn pulled out her phone and checked her email with a thin, fragile thread of hope. Maybe the company would give her a chance. Maybe they would understand. An email from FastDrop lit up the screen. Termination, effective immediately. Final wages would be sent by mail. Evelyn stood there in the freezing night, staring at the pile of bags by her feet. Her entire life fit into a few torn sacks. No job, no home, no one. She sank onto the curb, her back against a streetlight pole. Tears slid down her cheeks, turning cold in the night wind, but she didn't sob. She was too used to loss. She had cried too much in her life to remember how to cry out loud anymore. Her mother died when she was 8. Then her father left. Then the years in the orphanage. Then the shattered marriage to a violent husband. Then he died, leaving her with debts and painful memories. She was used to life knocking her down. But this time, she didn't know if she could get back up. "I don't regret helping him," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking in the wind. "But I don't know how I'm going to live tomorrow." The night stayed cold. The wind kept blowing. Evelyn sat there alone, staring into nothing, feeling as if she were dissolving into the darkness. Then headlights swept over her, blinding, sudden. A black car stopped right in front of her, its engine humming in the quiet night. The door opened. Evelyn looked up, her eyes blurred with tears and light, her heart pounding like a war drum as she saw the figure stepping down from the car. Gabriel Rivera stepped out of the black car, his long coat falling to his knees, his face still wearing that unreadable look from the first moment she'd seen him. Evelyn hurried to her feet, wiping the tears from her cheeks, trying to hold on to the last scrap of dignity she had left. "Are you following me?" she asked, her voice trembling but still forcing itself to sound tough. Gabriel showed no embarrassment, no hesitation. "I had someone check that you got home safely," he said, calm as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. Then his eyes swept over the pile of bags at her feet, over the tightly shut boarding house door, over the hopelessness she couldn't hide no matter how hard she tried. "Looks like you can't go home." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "That's none of your business." Gabriel looked at her, his gaze unshaken. "You saved my father's life tonight. That makes it my business." Evelyn shook her head and took a step back, as if distance could protect her. "I don't need your pity." "Good," Gabriel said, his voice still cold but carrying something else. "Because I didn't come here to pity you. I came to offer you a job." Evelyn blinked, not sure she'd heard him right. "What job?" Gabriel drew a breath, as if weighing how much to say. "My father is in the early stages of Alzheimer's. His memory is slipping. Some days he's lucid. Some days he doesn't recognize his own son." He paused, his eyes drifting toward the distance as if staring into an old ache. "I've hired nurses, doctors, caregivers, but my father doesn't trust them. He runs off, gets lost. Tonight wasn't the first time." Evelyn listened in silence, beginning to understand. "But tonight, he trusted you," Gabriel said, turning back to her with something that looked almost like disbelief. "Immediately. No hesitation. That's rare. Nearly impossible." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I want you to work for me. Live with my father. Talk to him. Walk with him. Make sure he doesn't wander off again. High pay. Free room and board. Safe. Evelyn studied him, searching for the trap hidden behind the offer. Something about this didn't feel right. Nobody gives anything away. What's the catch? She asked bluntly. Gabriel didn't look away. One rule. You don't ask about my business. You don't dig into what I do. You don't question what you see or hear in that house. Ever. Evelyn felt cold slide down her spine. What kind of job needed a rule like that? Gabriel didn't answer. He only stood there, watching her, waiting. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind hissing through the empty street. Evelyn looked down at the bags at her feet, her entire life stuffed into a few torn plastic sacks. She thought about everything she'd lost, about the violent husband who had once controlled every part of her life, about the vow she'd made to herself after he died, that she would never again let a man control her life. But this was work, not love. This was an opportunity, not a trap. She was standing in the street with no home, no job, no one. What did she have left to lose? I'll do it, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she expected. But I'm not your charity case. I work. I get paid. That's it, Gabriel nodded. That's all I'm asking. Evelyn pressed on, needing to be sure of what she was stepping into. And if I want to leave? Then you leave, Gabriel said without hesitation. You're not a prisoner. You're an employee. They looked at each other for a long moment, neither speaking. Then Gabriel signaled a guard to come take her things. The bags were loaded into the trunk, and Evelyn realized she was climbing into a car she didn't know, heading to a place she didn't know, with people she didn't know. She slid into the back seat and stared out the window as the car began to move. The shabby boarding house receded behind her, growing smaller, until it vanished into the darkness. Evelyn didn't know whether she was stepping into heaven or hell. She didn't know who the silent man beside her truly was, what he did to possess that vast fortune, why his men carried guns, and why he needed her to ask nothing at all. But she knew that tonight she had made a decision, and whether it turned out good or bad, she would have to live with it. The car rolled through the freezing night toward the Rivera estate, the place where Evelyn had no idea her life would never be the same again. On her first day at the Rivera estate, Evelyn was taken to her own room, and she couldn't believe her eyes. The room was larger than the miserable apartment she had once rented, with a soft bed dressed in spotless white sheets, a thick, warm comforter, and a wide-open closet waiting to be filled. There was even a private bathroom with a marble tub and bottles of sweet-scented shampoo whose names she'd never even heard before. Charles, the courteous butler, walked her through the mansion, from the sprawling kitchen stocked with everything she might need, to the stunning garden out back, and then to Edward's room. If you need anything at all, just say so. Mr. Rivera wants you to be comfortable, Charles said with a warm smile. Which Mr. Rivera? Evelyn thought, but she didn't ask. She'd learned how not to ask. On the third day, she began her real work. That morning, she walked with Edward in the vast garden behind the estate. He told her about every kind of flower, every tree, as if each one carried its own story. My Margaret planted this rose bush, he said, his voice lowering as he touched the deep red petals. 40 years ago. It still blooms every spring. Evelyn listened and nodded, unhurried, not interrupting. She understood that what he needed wasn't an answer, but someone willing to listen. By the 7th day, Edward began waiting for her in the sitting room each morning. Good morning, my girl. Shall we take a walk today? He said, his clouded eyes brightening when he saw her. He called her my girl, as if she were family, as if she belonged here. You've got kind eyes. Like my Margaret's, he told her one afternoon, when they were sitting on a stone bench in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky red. Evelyn felt her heart warm, but not everything in the estate was warm like that. She noticed the strange things, the things she had agreed to pretend not to see. People came and went constantly, men in expensive suits, guns tucked under their jackets, their sharp eyes sliding over her as if measuring a potential threat. Private meetings in Gabriel's office, the door always shut tight, sometimes tense voices leaking out, in English, in Italian, in the language of power and warning. Once, as she passed down a hallway, she saw a guard wiping something off the floor, a dark red stain. Evelyn turned her face away at once and kept walking as if she'd seen nothing. That was the deal. Gabriel was rarely home. He was always busy with work. disappearing early in the morning and returning when the night was already deep. But on the few occasions he was home, Evelyn could feel his eyes on her from a distance. He didn't speak to her, didn't come closer. He only stood there and watched her with something she couldn't read, complicated, unfathomable, and he never smiled. Yet despite those unsettling details, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in many long years. Safety. For the first time, she had enough food, a warm place to sleep, a steady job, and she had Edward, who treated her like family, who gave her the sense that she belonged somewhere. One evening after dinner, as they sat in the sitting room, Edward suddenly grew serious. His eyes were clearer than usual, bright and sharp, as if the fog of illness had briefly lifted. "Sit down, my girl," he said, his voice low and slow. "I need to tell you something." Evelyn sat beside him, her heart beating faster on instinct. "About my son," Edward went on, his gaze fixed on the distance. "The truth, not what the world sees, but who he really is." Edward stared out the window for a long time, as if he were gathering up the scattered pieces of memory drifting through the fog in his mind. Then he began to speak, his voice low and slow, as though every word carried the weight of years of suffering. "Gabriel wasn't always like this. Cold, distant, frightening." He paused, and his clouded eyes caught a brief glint of light as he reached back into the past. When he was young, he was different. He knew how to laugh. He knew how to dream. He wanted to be an architect, to build beautiful things, to create, not destroy. Evelyn listened in silence, trying to picture a different Gabriel, a young man with a smile and a future full of plans. It was hard to believe when she thought of the ice-cold man she had met. Then everything changed. Edward went on, his voice tightening. 15 years ago, Margaret, my wife, Gabriel's mother, she was killed. Evelyn held her breath, her heart drawing tight. It was a hit, from my rivals in the family business. Edward closed his eyes, pain etched into every wrinkle. "They came for me, but I wasn't home. Margaret was, and Gabriel too. He was only 21. My boy tried to protect his mother, but he couldn't." Edward's voice trembled, and tears slid down his weathered cheeks. "Margaret died in his arms. He screamed her name. He begged her not to go. And I couldn't save her. I came too late." Evelyn felt her eyes burn. She could see it in her mind. A young man holding his mother's body, screaming in despair, blood soaking through his clothes. No one could witness something like that and not be changed forever. "After that, Gabriel dropped out of school," Edward continued, his voice even, like someone telling a sorrowful old story. "He abandoned every dream. He joined my family business, the very thing I'd spent my whole life trying to keep him away from. He became cold, ruthless. He trusted no one. He built walls so high no one could reach him anymore. Not even me." Evelyn hesitated, then asked softly, "What kind of business is the family business, Edward?" Edward was silent for a long time, his clouded eyes on her as if weighing how much he should say. "The kind of business that keeps this city running in ways the police can't." Evelyn understood. She had known for a while, from the guns in the guards' hands, from the locked door meetings, from the blood stain on the hallway floor. But she didn't say it out loud. She didn't ask more. That was the agreement. "He isn't a monster, my girl," Edward said, his voice gentling. "I know the world sees him that way. But inside, he's still a broken boy who couldn't save his mother. He's just forgotten how to feel, forgotten how to trust, forgotten how to love." Then he looked at her, his gaze suddenly sharp, lucid enough to make her flinch. "I see the way he looks at you. When he thinks no one notices." Evelyn felt heat rush to her cheeks. "You confuse him," Edward went on. "Kindness confuses him. He doesn't know what to do with it." Evelyn didn't know what to say. She sat there in silence, trying to sort through everything she had just heard. Gabriel, the man with eyes as cold as a blizzard, had once been a dreamer who wanted to build beautiful things. He had lost his mother in the cruelest way imaginable. He had turned himself into something hard and terrible so no one could hurt him again. And now, how did he look at her? She didn't even dare to think about it. Footsteps sounded outside the door, slow and even. Evelyn lifted her head and saw Gabriel standing in the doorway, his face as cold and unreadable as ever. How long had he been there? Had he heard what his father had been saying? "Father," Gabriel said, his voice low and steady, "it's time for your medicine." His eyes flicked to Evelyn for a single brief second, but it was enough for her to feel the weight of it, Then he turned away without another word. Evelyn watched his back disappear beyond the door, her heart beating faster than usual. She didn't understand why. Or maybe she did, but she didn't dare admit it. 2 weeks had passed since Evelyn arrived at the Rivera estate. That night, when the clock hands had moved well past midnight, she was still sitting by Edward's bed, the book open on her lap. Though she was no longer reading, he was sleeping deeply, his breathing steady, his face peaceful as a child's. On nights like this, when he slept quietly without nightmares or bouts of confusion to torment him, Evelyn often stayed a little longer, just to be sure. She began to hum softly, a wordless melody she remembered from childhood, perhaps the song her mother used to sing to lull her to sleep before she died. She couldn't remember the lyrics anymore, only the tune, gentle and sorrowful as a river moving through the night. She didn't realize someone was standing in the doorway. Gabriel came home late as usual. He meant to step in and wish his father good night as he did every evening, a habit he'd kept since he was a boy, even after he'd become the cold man he was now. But when he reached the door, he stopped. Evelyn sat there, the warm yellow glow of the bedside lamp washing over her face, laying down soft light and shadow. She was humming, her voice as light as breath, the melody sad yet strangely beautiful. Gabriel stood still, not daring to move, afraid to break the moment. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard anyone sing. Maybe it had been his mother, 15 years ago, before everything collapsed. Evelyn stopped and turned when she sensed someone there. She startled, nearly dropping the book. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in." She started to rise, but Gabriel lifted a hand, signaling her to stay seated. "Don't. He's sleeping peacefully. That rarely happens." His voice was softer than usual, the sharp, cold edge gone for once. Gabriel stepped into the room and sat in the chair across from Evelyn, on the other side of his father's bed. They sat in silence, both watching Edward sleep. His face was calm, his lips slightly curved as if he were smiling in his dream. The room sank into stillness, holding only his steady breathing and the clocks ticking, beat by beat. "Thank you," Gabriel said at last, breaking the silence. "For what you do for him." Evelyn shook her head gently. "It's my job." "No." Gabriel looked at her, and his steely gaze was no longer ice-cold, but carried something else, something Evelyn couldn't read. "It isn't just a job. I've hired nurses, caregivers. None of them make him smile the way you do." Evelyn didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet and waited. "He talks about you," Gabriel went on, his voice lowering. "Every day." Evelyn said this. Evelyn did that. "I haven't heard him sound that happy since." He stopped, not finishing, but Evelyn understood. Since Margaret died, silence settled over the room again. Gabriel looked at her, and this time his gaze was different. Not cold, not assessing. Instead, there was something softer, but also more confused, as if he were seeing something he couldn't understand. Then he lifted his hand, slowly, and brushed aside a stray strand of hair that had fallen across her face, gently moving it away. Evelyn held her breath. Her heart stopped for a moment. His hand was warmer than she expected, his fingers grazing her cheek as he swept the hair aside. Then Gabriel pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned, his eyes blinking fast, as though he'd just woken from a dream. He stood abruptly and turned his back to her. "Get some rest. It's late." He walked toward the door, but paused at the threshold without turning around. "Good night, Evelyn." The first time he'd said her name. Not Miss Martinez, not the girl, but Evelyn. She felt her heart tremble. "Good night, Gabriel." The first time she'd said his name. He stood there one more second, as if he wanted to say something. Then he walked away, leaving Evelyn alone in the quiet room. She went back to her own room, lay down on the bed, and still couldn't sleep. Her heart was still racing, her cheek still warm where his fingers had touched her. She stared at the ceiling in the dark, trying to put what had just happened in order. "This is wrong," she told herself. "He's dangerous. He's a mafia boss. This is only a job." But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, she couldn't stop thinking about that moment, about the way he looked at her, about the way he touched her, about the way he said her name. And she knew, deep down, that something had changed, something she couldn't control, something more dangerous than any gun or any enemy Gabriel might ever have. Another 2 weeks passed, and Evelyn began to feel at ease in her new life. The work had a steady rhythm. Edward grew brighter by the day and more attached to her, and everything seemed to be settling into something stable. Gabriel was still rarely home, but in the brief moments they crossed paths, Something had shifted. He no longer looked at her with suspicion or that glacial distance. Sometimes he simply nodded to her as he passed in the hallway. Sometimes their eyes met, and he did not turn away the way he used to. Evelyn started to believe that maybe things would be all right. Maybe she had finally found a place where she belonged. That morning, she asked Charles for permission to go to the market to buy flowers for Edward. He loved white roses. She had noticed that during their walks in the garden. Charles agreed, but he insisted that a guard follow her, even if he kept his distance. In public, do not speak to strangers. Call immediately if anything feels wrong. Charles instructed her, his tone serious. Evelyn nodded, telling herself it was only excessive caution. She was just buying flowers. What could possibly happen? The morning flower market was crowded and lively. Evelyn moved between stalls, bursting with color, breathing in the familiar sweetness of petals and green stems. She stopped at a rose stand and carefully chose blooms that were pure white, still holding beads of dew. Edward will love these, she thought. Then a voice rose behind her. The flowers are beautiful. You must be buying them for someone very special. Evelyn turned and saw a man standing there, smiling politely. He looked about 40, handsome in a sharp, deliberate way, wearing an expensive suit, hair neatly combed. But something was off. His smile never reached his eyes, and those eyes, cold and calculating, were watching her as if she were being measured like prey. Evelyn's instincts tightened. She answered briefly that she was buying them for a friend. The man tilted his head, his smile widening but staying just as cold. A friend, is it? Or the old man you are caring for at the Rivera estate? Evelyn froze. The blood in her veins seemed to stop. How did he know? How did he know who she was, where she was, what she was doing? She asked who he was, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to control it. The man shrugged, relaxed as if they were chatting about the weather. Just a business associate. Gabriel's. We have history. He stepped closer, and Evelyn stepped back, her survival instincts screaming inside her skull. Tell Gabriel that Marcus Romano sends his regards. Then he leaned toward her, his words a whisper at her ear, cold as a blade. And tell him that nothing he loves is safe. Nothing at all. Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to call for the guard. But when she blinked, the man had vanished into the crowd, as if he had never been there. She stood shaking, and the bouquet slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. She spun, searching, and when she saw the guard moving toward her with worry on his face, she ran to him and grabbed his arm. Take me back. Right now. On the way home, Evelyn told him everything over the phone, and he immediately called the estate. When the car pulled up to the gate, Charles was already waiting. The kindness he usually wore now tightened into strain and grim focus. He led her inside, making call after call, his voice lowered. This is very bad, very bad, Charles murmured as he ended one call. Evelyn sat in the sitting room and waited, unsure whether fear or dread was the stronger thing inside her. Edward came to her, as if he could sense that something had gone wrong. He took her hand, his old fingers trembling. Do not worry, my girl, he said softly. My son will protect you. But Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen there before. Fear. Edward Rivera, a man who had lived his whole life in a violent underworld, was afraid, and that terrified Evelyn more than anything Marcus Romano could have said. Then came the sound of a car stopping in the drive, followed by fast, heavy footsteps on the gravel. The front door flew open. Gabriel stormed in, his coat flaring behind him, his face black as a storm night. He was home. Gabriel walked into the sitting room with a face black as a storm night, his stormy look cold as ice. He didn't look at anyone else. He went straight to Evelyn where she sat, each step landing like the heartbeat of danger. Tell me everything. Every word he said, what he looked like. Was anyone else there? His voice was level and cold, but Evelyn could feel the fury rolling beneath that calm surface. She told him from beginning to end, leaving out nothing. The man had called himself Marcus Romano. The cold smile, the calculating eyes, and the threat. Nothing you love is safe. When she finished, Gabriel slammed his hand down on the table. The crack of it made Evelyn flinch, and Edward shrank back in his chair. Gabriel pulled out his phone and called Nathan, his voice sharp as a blade. Double security. No one comes in or out without my permission. He ended the call and made another. Find out how Romano learned about her. Someone talked. Find that person. Evelyn stood, tightness rising in her chest. I'm not a prisoner here. Gabriel turned on her, his gaze cutting straight through. You don't understand what kind of situation you're in." His voice dropped into a warning. Evelyn didn't step back. She had been silent too long, pretending not to see too much. "Then explain it to me," she said, louder than she meant to. "I'm not a child. I deserve to know what I'm involved in." Silence. Gabriel studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to say. Then he exhaled and walked to the window, turning his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, without feeling, as if he were reading his own sentence aloud. "My family aren't businessmen, not the legal kind. We control a lot in this city. Protection, gambling, imports, things the law can't touch." He turned to face her again, his eyes still cold, but with something deep moving underneath. "I'm the head of this family, the boss, and Marcus Romano wants everything I have." Evelyn felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. She had known. She had suspected for a long time, but hearing him confirm it still made her reel. "You mean you're Mafia?" Gabriel met her eyes without flinching. "I mean, I'm a man with enemies, and now they know you exist." Evelyn shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "Why? I'm just a caregiver. I'm nobody." Gabriel was quiet for a beat, his gaze complicated, full of things he didn't say. "You aren't nobody. Not anymore." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Marcus saw the way my father cares about you. That makes you a target. He'll use you to reach me, to hurt me." Fear rose in Evelyn's chest, but it wasn't fear of Gabriel. It was fear for what could happen to Edward, to the people who had treated her with kindness. "Then maybe I should leave," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "if I'm putting everyone in danger." "No." Gabriel cut her off so fast it was almost instinct, so forceful it startled them both. Silence stretched between them. Gabriel swallowed hard, as if fighting to control something inside himself. "No," he said again, softer now but unwavering. "You're safer here. Inside these walls. With me." Evelyn looked at the man standing in front of her. Mafia. Criminal. Dangerous. Someone she should have run from. But he was also the man who had pulled her off the street on a freezing night. The son of Edward. The man she had come to love like a father. The man who had brushed a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness she never believed he could possess. Someone she was beginning to feel something for, even though she didn't want to admit it. "I need time," she said at last, exhausted. "To think." Gabriel nodded, not pushing. "You've got all the time you need. But don't leave the house alone." Evelyn turned and walked toward her room, her mind spinning with a million thoughts. Who was she now? A caregiver? A target? Or someone who mattered to the most powerful mafia boss in the city? And more than that, how did she feel about it? That night, Evelyn lay on her bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling yet not truly seeing anything. Darkness wrapped around her like a heavy blanket, and inside her mind a million thoughts kept turning without rest. Everything she knew about Gabriel was different now. He killed people. He smuggled. He controlled the entire city's underworld. He was a criminal, a mafia boss, the kind of man she should have run from as far and as fast as she could. Yet he loved his father so fiercely he would do anything for him. He had saved her from the street on a freezing night. He had looked at her with an expression she couldn't explain, as if she mattered, as if she meant something. Memories came rushing in without permission. Ryan, her former husband, handsome, charming, full of promise when they first met. He spoke sweetly and offered a bright future. Then everything changed. Charm became control. Sweet words became orders. And when she dared to resist, words became fists. Evelyn still remembered nights spent crying alone, bruises she had to hide beneath long sleeves, the moments she stared into the mirror and didn't recognize herself. She remembered the day the police came to tell her Ryan had died in a car accident, and instead of grief she felt relief. The guilt of that feeling had haunted her for years. But tonight, lying here, she began to compare. Gabriel was dangerous, but not to her. He had never raised a hand to her, never shouted in her face, never made her feel small or worthless. He gave her choices. He gave her space. He gave her the right to say no. Ryan had controlled her, because he wanted to own her like an object. But Gabriel protected her for what reason? She didn't know, yet she knew the two were not the same. The real question wasn't whether to stay or leave. She knew she had nowhere to go. No home, no job, no one in this world. The real question was whether she could accept this world. Accept the real Gabriel. Accept the darkness that came with the light she had found here. Or would she live in this mansion as a stranger, forever standing outside looking in, never truly belonging. The next morning, Evelyn came down to the kitchen with dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Edward was already there, a cup of tea steaming in front of him. When he saw her, his clouded eyes brightened, but they were also full of worry. "You're still here," he said, his voice as if he hardly dared to believe it. Evelyn sat beside him and gave a small smile. "I'm still here, Edward." He smiled and took her hand in his trembling old fingers. "I'm so glad. I was afraid you would run." Evelyn looked down at their hands, their fingers interlaced. "I thought about it too. But I can't leave you." Edward's grip tightened, gentle but sure. "And what about my son? Can you accept him, all that he is?" Evelyn was silent for a long time, thinking about the question. Then she answered honestly, "I'm trying." A soft sound from the kitchen doorway made her look up. Gabriel was standing there. She didn't know for how long, his gray eyes on her with something she couldn't read. He didn't say anything. He only gave her a small nod, a gesture that was quiet but full of meaning. Then he turned and walked toward his office. But Evelyn saw his shoulders lower, as if an invisible weight had just been lifted. She watched his back disappear around the corner, and she knew she had decided she would stay. Not because she had no other choice, but because she chose to. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel was home more often. He said it was for security, because he needed to keep an eye on things after Marcus Romano appeared. But everyone could see the real reason. Dinner was no longer just Evelyn and Edward sitting alone. Gabriel began to show up, taking his seat at the head of the table, listening as his father told old stories. Edward spoke about his youth, about the years he spent building his empire, about Margaret and the summers they went to the beach together. Sometimes he forgot what he was saying halfway through. Sometimes he remembered the smallest details with perfect clarity. And in those moments, Evelyn saw something she had never seen before. Gabriel smiled, not a polite smile, not a strained one, a real smile that lit up his eyes and drew fine lines at the corners. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of the young man Edward had described, the dreamer hidden beneath the cold armor of a Mafia boss. After Edward went to bed, Gabriel and Evelyn began having late-night conversations in the sitting room. They sat on the sofa near the fireplace, flames dancing and casting shadows on the walls, and they spoke about things they had never told anyone. Gabriel talked about his childhood, about the days he was a boy running through the garden with his mother, about the dream of becoming an architect that had died long ago. Evelyn spoke about her failed marriage, not in detail, only enough for him to understand. "He hurt me," she said, her voice as soft as breath, "in ways I still can't say out loud." Gabriel looked at her, his gray eyes darkening with something dangerous. "If he weren't dead, I'd kill him with my own hands." Evelyn looked at him and knew he meant it. It should have frightened her. Somehow, it made her feel protected. "We're both broken people, aren't we?" she asked one late night. Gabriel stared into the fire and was silent for a long time. "Maybe broken people understand each other better," he said. "Maybe we're tired of pretending we're still whole." Then the fateful night came. At 2 a.m, Evelyn was jolted awake by screaming from Edward's room. She ran, and found him sitting up in bed, eyes wild, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Margaret," he cried, his voice shattered. "Margaret, don't leave me." Gabriel was already there, trying to soothe his father, but it was useless. Edward didn't recognize his son. He saw Evelyn step in, and his eyes lit up. "Margaret," he whispered, reaching toward her. "You came back to me." Evelyn didn't correct him. She sat by the bed and took his hand, letting him believe she was his late wife. They cared for him together through the night, Gabriel on one side, Evelyn on the other, until the confusion passed and Edward finally fell asleep, still clutching both their hands. At 5 a.m, as first light began to slip through the curtains, Gabriel and Evelyn sat by the bed, exhausted. "Thank you," Gabriel said, his voice rough with fatigue, "for being here, for everything." Evelyn looked at him. "I can't be anywhere else." Gabriel turned to her, his steely gaze carrying the question he had held inside for too long. "Why? You could have run. After everything you know about me, why did you stay?" Evelyn met his gaze and answered with the simplest truth she had. "Because you aren't what people say you are. Not with me." Silence. Gabriel lifted his hand, slowly, and touched her cheek. This time he didn't pull away. Evelyn didn't step back. He leaned toward her, moving slowly, giving her time to refuse. She didn't. Their lips met, gentle, hesitant, filled with desire held down for weeks. The kiss was brief but burning, like a spark touching gunpowder. They drew apart, both breathing hard. Gabriel closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "I shouldn't." "Then why does it feel right?" Evelyn whispered back. Silence. There was no answer. Only the two of them looking at each other as dawn light slowly filled the room. Gabriel stood and stepped back. "We should rest." "Yes," Evelyn nodded. "We should rest." They said nothing more. Gabriel left the room, and Evelyn stayed behind alone by Edward's bed, her fingers touching her lips where his warmth still lingered. Everything had changed, and they both knew it. A week had passed since that kiss. Gabriel and Evelyn kept their distance during the day, never staying alone together for long, never mentioning what had happened. Yet the tension between them showed in every look, every accidental brush of hands that was snatched back too fast. Edward watched them with a knowing smile. He said nothing, but his clouded eyes brightened with quiet happiness whenever he saw them near each other. He knew. That morning began like any other, until Dr. Morrison called. Edward needed a special medication, a new prescription that had just been written and had to be filled that same day. Gabriel was in an important meeting with associates from out of town and couldn't leave. Charles was down with a bad cold, resting in his room. Nathan had to stay and protect the estate, especially with Gabriel receiving guests. "I'll go," Evelyn offered. "It's just the pharmacy 2 blocks away. I'll take 2 guards with me." Gabriel looked at her, worry filling his eyes. "I don't like this." Evelyn gave him a small smile, trying to soothe him. "It's broad daylight, 10 minutes. I'll be fine." Gabriel hesitated, looking at her, then out the window where sunlight poured down. Finally he nodded, though he still didn't look comfortable. "All right, but stay with the guards at all times, every second." Evelyn nodded, took the prescription, and went out with 2 guards behind her. The pharmacy was only 2 blocks away. She walked in, handed over the paper, waited, paid, received the medication. Everything felt so ordinary that she almost forgot Gabriel's warnings. She stepped back out the door, the 2 guards standing right outside as promised. "Let's go home," she said with a faint smile. Then everything happened too fast. A black van pulled tight to the curb, the door flew open, and 4 men jumped out. They moved like ghosts, fast and professional. And before Evelyn could even react, both guards were taken down and lay motionless on the pavement. She tried to scream, but a rough hand clamped over her mouth. Another arm hooked around her waist and yanked her toward the van. She fought, kicking and swinging, but they were too strong. A cloth bag was shoved over her head. Her hands were tied behind her back, and she was thrown into the back of the van like a package. The door slammed. The engine roared. The van sped away, and Evelyn knew no one had had time to see anything. When she came to, she was in an abandoned warehouse, cold, dark, the air thick with damp and dust. Her hands were still bound, but the hood had been pulled off. She blinked, trying to adjust to the dim light filtering through the grimy high windows. "We meet again, beautiful. Sorry about the temporary accommodations." That familiar voice cut through the darkness. Evelyn lifted her head and saw Marcus Romano standing in front of her, still in his expensive suit, still wearing that polite smile he'd worn at the flower market. But now the smile carried a triumphant edge that made her skin prickle. "Gabriel will come for me," Evelyn said, forcing her voice steady though her heart was pounding like a drum. "And he'll kill you." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." He leaned closer, his cold eyes no longer bothering to hide what he truly was. "You're not the target, sweetheart. You're the bait. I've waited years for Gabriel Rivera to have a weakness, and now you show up." Evelyn shook her head, trying to deny it. "I'm not his weakness. I'm just a caregiver." Marcus tilted his head, looking at her the way one looks at a naive child. "Is that what you tell yourself?" "I've seen the way he looks at you. Gabriel Rivera doesn't look at anyone like that. He loves you, and love makes men stupid, makes them careless, makes them walk straight into a trap." He pulled out his phone, dialed, and waited. When someone picked up, his smile spread wider. "Gabriel, I've got something of yours here. Come alone, or I'll send her back in pieces." He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and looked at Evelyn with satisfaction. "Now we wait." Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing back tears. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying Gabriel wouldn't do something reckless, wouldn't come alone, wouldn't let love make him a fool, the way Marcus said. But deep down, she knew he would come, and that frightened her more than anything Marcus could do to her. Gabriel's phone vibrated in the middle of the meeting. An unknown number, he answered, listened, and his face slowly drained until it was as pale as paper. The associates around him fell silent when they saw the change come over him. Gabriel ended the call and stood motionless for a long moment, his hand crushing the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. Nathan stepped closer, his voice tight with worry. "Boss, what is it?" Gabriel turned to his most trusted guard, and for the first time in Nathan's life he saw something in his boss's eyes that made his skin crawl. Fear. Gabriel Rivera, the Mafia boss who never trembled before anything, was afraid. "Marcus has Evelyn." Gabriel's voice shook slightly as he forced the words out. Nathan reacted at once. "I'll gather the team. We will." "No." Gabriel cut him off. "He said to come alone." "I will go alone." Nathan's eyes went wide. "That's suicide. It's obviously a trap." Gabriel looked at him, and in his gaze was something Nathan had never seen in all the years he had served at his side. Not anger, not determination. Love. Pure, desperate love. "Then it is suicide, but I will not risk her life." Nathan started to speak, but Gabriel had already turned away. "If I don't come back, take care of my father. That is an order." He walked out the door, his coat whipping behind him. Then he stopped, glanced back at Nathan with that familiar sharpness. "Give me 20 minutes, then bring everyone, every last one." Nathan let out a breath, nodded with a faint smile. "I knew you weren't stupid enough for that." Gabriel didn't smile. "I won't die today. I have someone I need to get back to." In the abandoned warehouse, Evelyn was tied to a chair, her lips split and swollen from being slapped when she refused to answer Marcus's questions. The metallic taste of blood spread across her tongue, but she didn't cry, didn't beg. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Marcus paced around her like a hunting animal, talking through his plan. "Kill Gabriel, take the Rivera Empire, become the city's one and only boss." He spoke as if it were inevitable, as if victory were already in his hands. Evelyn tried to buy time, asking questions, keeping him talking. She didn't know whether anyone was coming to save her, but she knew she needed time. Deep down, she was terrified enough to want to scream, but she didn't let Marcus see it. "Gabriel will destroy you," she said, her voice so steady it surprised even her. "Even if he dies, his people will hunt you forever." Marcus gave a short, amused laugh, bold words for a woman tied to a chair. The sound of a vehicle engine rose from outside. Marcus smiled and walked to the door. Gabriel Rivera stepped into the warehouse, alone, both hands raised above his head. Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight of him. He really came. He really risked his life for her. Marcus laughed in triumph, the sound echoing in the empty space. The great Gabriel Rivera, on his knees for a nobody. Gabriel moved toward Evelyn, his eyes never leaving her for even a second. "She isn't a nobody," he said, his voice low and certain. "She is the only person in years who has looked at me and not seen a monster." Marcus drew his gun and aimed it straight at Gabriel. "How touching. Any last words?" Gabriel stopped, his icy gray eyes locked on Marcus. "Only 3 words. Nathan, go now." The lights went out instantly. Gunshots cracked through the darkness. Screams. Running footsteps. Chaos. Nathan and the team had surrounded the warehouse beforehand, waiting for their boss's signal. Now they surged in like a flood, flashlight beams and gunfire tearing the night open. In the dark, Gabriel lunged for Evelyn. He pulled a knife, cut the ropes in an instant, then crushed her to his chest, shielding her from everything around them. He found her. She was safe. He found her. He whispered into her ear, his voice shaking with relief. Evelyn cried. For the first time since she was taken, she let the tears fall. Not from fear, but from relief so thick it stole her breath. "You came," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You really came. I will always come for you. Always." The gunfire stopped. The lights snapped back on. Marcus Romano lay on the floor, wounded, his hands cuffed, Gabriel's men all around him. He was alive, but the triumph in his eyes was gone, replaced by the fear of a defeated man. Gabriel stood, pulled Evelyn up with him, and looked at Marcus with a hatred so deep it seemed to darken the air. He wanted to kill him. Right here. Right now. Evelyn could feel it. She took Gabriel's hand and squeezed hard. "Don't," she said softly. Don't do it in front of me, please. Gabriel looked at her, and his steely gaze softened. Then he nodded and turned to Nathan. Take him away. I'll deal with him later. Nathan nodded and ordered the guards to drag Marcus out. Gabriel lifted Evelyn into his arms, refusing to let her walk even when she said she could. He carried her to the car, set her in the back seat, and sat beside her, never letting go of her hand for even a second. She leaned into his chest and listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady. You're crazy, she whispered, coming here like that. Crazy for you, he answered, his voice low and warm. Evelyn gave a small smile. In spite of everything, in spite of the fear and the pain, she still smiled. And in that moment, Gabriel knew he had lost his heart completely. It belonged to her now, forever. Back at the estate, Dr. Morrison was already waiting. He examined Evelyn carefully and concluded she had only a few bruises and a small split on her lip. No serious injuries. She's lucky, he told Gabriel, though his eyes made it clear he understood lucky wasn't the right word. Edward had been waiting in the sitting room ever since he heard. When he saw Evelyn step in, he broke down, his old hands trembling as he reached for her. My girl, my girl. He kept repeating it, tears running down his wrinkled cheeks. Evelyn knelt beside him and let him hold her. I'm all right, Edward. I'm here, she whispered, fighting her own tears. That night, Evelyn lay in her room beneath warm blankets, wrapped in the safety of the Rivera estate. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark warehouse, Marcus's cold smile, the darkness swallowing her whole. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, her heart racing in her chest. A soft knock sounded at the door. She knew who it was before it opened. Gabriel stepped in, still in the black shirt from earlier, sleeves rolled up, his face tired but his eyes wide awake. He didn't ask permission. He simply walked in and sat in the chair beside her bed, as if that were where he belonged. Can't sleep, he asked gently. Evelyn shook her head. Every time I close my eyes. Gabriel nodded, understanding without needing her to finish. He knew. I'll be here, he said, until you can sleep. Silence settled over the room, only the faint wind outside the window and the steady breathing of two people. Then Gabriel spoke, his voice lower than usual, as if every word carried the weight of years. Today I almost lost you. Evelyn looked at him. But you didn't. Gabriel looked down at his hands, his fingers laced together. I've lost everyone I ever cared about. My mother, my humanity, my ability to feel anything. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers in the dark. I thought I had accepted that I would die alone, cold, empty. Then his voice softened, and something raw moved under it. Then you showed up, on a freezing winter night, with my father on the rack of a broken bicycle. Evelyn felt her heart beat faster. Gabriel rose and moved closer to the bed, still keeping a careful distance. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to love without destroying. I don't know how to let someone in without being afraid they'll die. He stopped and drew a deep breath. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel anything for you. Evelyn held her breath, waiting. Gabriel looked at her, his eyes holding everything he didn't know how to say. I love you, Evelyn. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how, but I love you. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Evelyn sat up slowly and lifted a hand to his face, her small palm against his rough skin, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. I know who you are, she said softly. I know what you've done. I know what you're capable of. And I should be afraid. I should run. She paused and looked deep into his eyes. But I'm not afraid, and I won't run. Because to me, you aren't a monster. You're just a man who forgot how to be loved. Let me remind you. Gabriel closed his eyes, as if her words had touched a wound he'd kept hidden for years. There was no fierce kiss. Only Gabriel sitting down beside her, his hand taking hers, his forehead resting against hers. They stayed like that in the gentle dark, their breaths mingling. We'll figure it out together, Evelyn whispered. Together, Gabriel repeated the word, his voice like a vow, and for the first time in 15 long, cold years, he believed it. 3 months had passed since that fateful night. Evelyn and Gabriel were officially together now. No more hiding, no more distance. The Rivera estate, once cold and shadowed, felt warmer now, filled with laughter and family dinners. But alongside that joy, a sadness was spreading, slow, and inevitable, like the darkness that gathers before sunset. Edward was growing weaker. His Alzheimer's was progressing far faster than Dr. Morrison had ever expected. Some days he didn't recognize Gabriel at all, calling him by strange names, or staring at him with the bewildered eyes of someone facing a stranger. In those moments, Evelyn saw pain gather inside Gabriel's gray eyes, a pain he never put into words. Yet strangely, Edward always recognized Evelyn. Every time she entered the room, his cloudy eyes brightened. "My beloved girl, you came back," he would whisper, reaching for her. Sometimes he called her Margaret, sometimes Evelyn, but the way he looked at her was always overflowing with love, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Evelyn stayed with him every day, never far. She read to him, told him the stories he loved, hummed the old melodies he used to hum when they walked in the garden. Gabriel came home more, too, cutting back on work, cutting back on meetings, because he knew their time with his father was running out. That night, Edward had one of his rare lucid moments. His eyes were clearer, his voice steadier, as if the illness had stepped back for a few precious hours. He asked for both Gabriel and Evelyn to come to his room. "Sit down, both of you. I need to say something." They sat on either side of his bed, holding his hands. Edward looked at them and gave a weak smile. "I don't have much time left. I can feel it." Gabriel started to speak, but Edward raised a hand to stop him. "Let me talk, my son. Just once in my life, let this old man speak." Gabriel went quiet, tears beginning to gather in his gray eyes. Edward looked at his son, his gaze filled with love and regret. "I'm sorry, Gabriel, for the life I gave you, for the world I pulled you into. Your mother never wanted this for you. Neither did I, truly." He paused and drew a trembling breath. "But I'm proud of you, not for the empire you built, for the man you're becoming." He turned to Evelyn and smiled. "She changed you. Don't lose her." Gabriel tightened his grip on his father's hand, his voice breaking. "I won't, Father. I promise." Edward nodded, then turned back to Evelyn. His eyes were gentle, the way they had been the first time she found him at the bus stop on that freezing winter night. "You stopped for an old man in the cold. You didn't have to. You had nothing. You were about to lose everything. And still, you stopped." Evelyn cried, unable to hold the tears back. "That kindness, that moment," Edward continued, his voice shaking but full of gratitude, "saved my son. It gave me my family back before I die. Thank you, my beloved girl. Thank you for bringing the light back into this house." Evelyn held his hand tighter, tears pouring down her face. "Thank you for letting me in, Edward. You're the father I never had." Edward smiled, warm and satisfied. "And you are the daughter I always wished for." He closed his eyes, the smile still on his lips, his voice fading into a whisper. "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." Gabriel and Evelyn stayed beside him all night, holding his hands, neither of them speaking a word. Edward slept, his breathing steady, his face peaceful as a child's. Outside the window, dawn began to rise, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and orange. Evelyn leaned into Gabriel's shoulder, her eyes still wet. He held her without speaking, simply there, steady as stone in the middle of a storm. They knew tonight might be the last night, and they wanted to be with him, all the way to the end. Evelyn woke up in the chair beside Edward's bed, her neck aching from the way she'd dozed off. Morning light poured through the window, gentle and warm. She blinked, trying to bring her vision into focus, and realized Gabriel was standing by the window with his back to her, staring down at the garden below. "Gabriel?" she called softly, her voice hoarse with sleep. He didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "He's gone." His voice was low and even, as if he were holding back something inside himself that was about to break. Evelyn froze. She turned to Edward and understood at once. He lay there, peaceful, his hand still holding hers. But his chest no longer rose and fell. His skin was pale, yet his face was strangely serene, his lips still carrying the faint curve of a smile, as if he were dreaming something beautiful, as if he had found Margaret again somewhere on the other side of the world. Tears spilled down Evelyn's face without sound, only quiet drops sliding over her cheeks. She didn't sob. She had cried too much in her life to remember how to scream anymore. But this pain was different. It was deep and heavy, like a stone pressing down on her chest. She had lost a father, the father she had never had by blood, but had been given by love. Gabriel still stood there, unmoving as a statue. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He was frozen completely, as if his feelings had been locked inside a box he didn't know how to open. He had built walls too high, too thick, until even the pain of losing his father couldn't break through. Evelyn rose and walked to him slowly. She stood behind him, then wrapped her arms around him from behind, her cheek resting against his back. "You can cry," she whispered. "You can feel." Gabriel trembled. His whole body began to shake, like a dam about to split. Then he broke. There was no loud weeping, only tears slipping silently down his hard, sharp face, falling onto Evelyn's hands where they held him. For the first time in 15 years, since the day his mother died, Gabriel Rivera cried. The funeral took place 3 days later, small and private, exactly the way Edward wanted it. Only the closest people. Charles with red-rimmed eyes, Nathan standing rigid as a guard, a few trusted members of the family, no press, no outsiders, only the people who truly loved him. Evelyn stood to speak, her voice trembling but steady. "Edward Rivera taught me something I will never forget," she began. "He taught me that family isn't blood. It's the people who choose to walk with you through the dark. He chose to let me in, a stranger, a nobody. And he gave me everything I had never had. A home, a purpose, a family." She paused, swallowing back tears. "He used to say that kindness is never wasted. He was right, because one act of kindness led me here. To him, to all of you." She looked down at the coffin, her voice gentle as if she were speaking to him alone. "Rest now, Edward. You were loved. You will be remembered. You're home." After the funeral, when everyone had left, Charles came to Evelyn holding an envelope. "Mr. Edward left this for you. He wrote it a few weeks ago, when he still could." Evelyn took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it and read, and the tears came again. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means I have gone to my Margaret at last. Do not grieve too long. You gave me the happiest months of my final years. You reminded me that kindness still exists, even in a world as dark as ours. Take care of my son. He needs you more than he dares to admit. And remember, you stopped for a stranger in the cold. That is who you are. Keep being that person. The world needs more people like you. With all my love, Edward." Evelyn folded the letter and held it to her chest, right over her heart. Gabriel stood beside her and took her hand, saying nothing. "He loved you," he said at last. "I know," Evelyn whispered. "I loved him too." They stood there, looking at Edward's grave beside Margaret's, surrounded by the white rose bushes he loved. At last, after so many years of loneliness, he was home. Home with the one he loved most. 6 months after Edward passed away, Gabriel began to change. Not suddenly, but slowly, like ice melting under spring sunlight. He started pulling back from illegal operations, handing off pieces of the business to Nathan and the trusted people in the family. The closed-door meetings in his office became fewer. The armed men coming and going through the estate grew sparse. And for the first time in his life, Gabriel Rivera began to build instead of destroy. He founded a charity called the Rivera Light Foundation, dedicated to helping the unhoused and survivors of domestic violence. Evelyn became the executive director, using the very wounds of her own life to help people trapped in similar pain. One evening, as they sat in Edward's old office, Evelyn asked him, "Why did you change?" Gabriel looked out the window, where his father's white rose garden was still blooming. "I promised my father, and I promised myself." He turned back to her, his eyes gentler than she had ever seen them. "My father told me to protect what I love. I can't do that from a prison cell, or from a grave. And you showed me there's another way, to have strength without destroying." On a winter evening, exactly 1 year after that fateful night, Gabriel took Evelyn out. He drove in silence, refusing to tell her where they were going, no matter how many times she asked. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked for the 3rd time. "You'll see," Gabriel said, smiling with quiet mystery. The car stopped on Maple Street, a place familiar and yet strange. Evelyn stepped out and went still. The old bus stop, where she had found Edward on that winter night the year before, had been completely rebuilt. It was no longer a cold bench abandoned to the weather. Now it had a warm shelter, comfortable seats, soft lights glowing bright, and a heating system that breathed gentle warmth into the air. A large sign hung above it, engraved with the words Edward Rivera Memorial Stop. "Gabriel, what is this?" Evelyn whispered, her eyes blurring with tears. Gabriel stood beside her, looking up at the sign bearing his father's name. I rebuilt it, so no one else has to stand out here freezing the way my father did that night, so no one else has to hope a stranger will stop to help. Evelyn turned to him, tears running down her cheeks, but Gabriel wasn't looking at her. He was kneeling, in front of her. In his hand was a small black velvet box. He opened it, and inside a diamond ring caught the bus stop lights and flashed. "Evelyn Martinez," he began, his voice trembling but certain. "You stopped for a stranger on the coldest night of the year. You gave up everything you had to help someone you didn't even know." He looked up at her, steely gaze filled with love and gratitude. "All my life, I only knew how to take. You taught me how to give. You saved my father. You saved me. You saved everything I didn't even know I needed. Will you spend the rest of your life teaching me more? Will you marry me?" Evelyn laughed, tears pouring down, but her smile bright as sunrise. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." Gabriel lifted an eyebrow, and a rare spark of mischief lit his eyes. "So that's a yes?" "That's a yes," Evelyn whispered. "A million times yes." Gabriel slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and kissed her. A kiss sweet and warm beneath the lights of the new bus stop, right where everything had begun. They stood there holding each other in the cold night. The wind still moved through the street. Snow began to fall in a soft drift, but they didn't feel the cold. "I love you, Gabriel Rivera," Evelyn whispered against his ear. "I love you, Evelyn Martinez," he murmured, holding her tighter. "Soon to be Evelyn Rivera." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, smiling with happiness. Evelyn Rivera. I like that name. 5 years later, the Rivera Light Foundation had helped hundreds of people off the streets, building multiple shelters, and creating support programs for survivors of domestic violence across the city. Evelyn was the chief executive officer, and Gabriel served as honorary chairman, husband and wife, working side by side to turn Edward's legacy into something real. The Edward Rivera Community Center, the largest support center in the city, opened its doors every day to people who came for meals, a safe place to sleep, counseling, and job training. Dozens of lives were changed. Hundreds of families were pieced back together, and the light Edward once wished for now shone everywhere. That afternoon, Evelyn stood in front of the center, watching the steady flow of people coming and going with a look of deep fulfillment. A familiar car pulled up, and Gabriel stepped out, carrying a 3-year-old child with black hair and gray eyes just like his father's. Their son, Edward Gabriel Rivera Jr., known to everyone as Little Eddie. "Mom!" The boy waved, grinning from ear to ear when he saw Evelyn. She ran to them, gathered her son into her arms, then kissed her husband. "You're home early," Gabriel smiled, a smile that appeared far more often now than it had 5 years ago. "I can't stay away. Eddie missed his mom too much." "Only Eddie?" Evelyn teased. "What about Dad?" Gabriel laughed, warmth flashing in his eyes. "All right, both of us." A reporter from the local television station approached, microphone in hand. "Mrs. Rivera, your foundation has done incredible things. Can you share how it all began?" Evelyn smiled, looked at Gabriel, looked at her son, then looked toward the center bearing her father-in-law's name. "It began at a bus stop, an old man who got lost, and a choice." The reporter waited, and Evelyn went on. 5 years ago, I was a delivery driver with nothing in my hands. I saw an old man freezing at a bus stop. I could have kept walking, but I stopped. That one choice gave me everything." After the reporter left, Evelyn stood alone at the gate of the center, taking in the scene around her. Warm lights glowing, children's laughter ringing from the play area, people who had once been unhoused now learning a trade, being supported, being given a second chance. She thought of that winter night, the night she lost everything and yet found everything. That night, she believed she was only helping an old man find his way home. She didn't know she was finding her own way home, too. Edward used to say that kindness is never wasted. He had been right. One small act of compassion had created all of this. A family, a charity, a future. And it all began with a choice. To stop, to help, to care. Gabriel came to her and stood beside her in silence. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn turned to him and smiled. "About how one decision changed everything." Gabriel nodded. "The best decision you ever made?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, the best decision we ever made." She lifted her face to the sky, where the first stars were beginning to glitter in the night, and whispered, "Thank you, Edward. I kept the lamp lit. A light wind moved through the air, carrying the chill of winter on its way. But Evelyn didn't feel cold. She had a family, a home, a purpose. Little Eddie ran over and wrapped his arms around his mother's legs. "Mom, I'm cold." Evelyn lifted him up and kissed his cheek. "Let's go inside, sweetheart. Let's go home." Gabriel wrapped an arm around both of them, his voice low and warm. "Home. I like that word." They walked into the center, the door closing behind them. But the lights remained bright, warm, radiant, full of hope. The Rivera Light Foundation sign glowed in the night, a promise that kindness would always exist, proof that one small act could change the whole world. The story of Evelyn and Gabriel teaches us that kindness, no matter how small, can create miracles, that in this world, harsh as it can be, there are still hearts that know how to love, how to stop for someone else, how to give without expecting anything back. And that family isn't blood, but the people who choose to stand beside you in your hardest moments. Let this story remind us that every day, we have the chance to do something good, even if it's small, even if it's simple. A smile, a helping hand, a gentle question. You never know how your small act might change someone's life. Thank you for walking with us on Evelyn and Gabriel's journey. If this story touched your heart, please tap the like button and share this video with the people you love, the people who need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories every day. We would truly love to know how you feel about this story. Did it make you think of someone in your life? Have you ever done something kind for a stranger and received something unexpected in return? Share your story in the comments below. We read every comment, and we can't wait to hear what's on your heart. Wishing you and your family good health, joyful days, and a life filled with peace and love. Remember, kindness still has many chapters left to tell. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.